Paul, why is it that the head of the post office makes more than the caps that are imposed on the banks that receive the TARP funds, $850,000 a year? He has a $6 billion deficit that the taxpayers have to fund.
Well, I guess we could just say they're the insiders and they know how to take care of themselves. So it's just an example of what happens when the government gets involved. It makes the case for a free market economy and getting the government out of the way. Then you're held in check by fraud laws. If you commit fraud, then you go to jail. But here, what we do is we literally bail out the people who have committed fraud, or they join the government. A story I read today, I think somebody committed all this fraud and got away with it, and so he gets an appointment in the government. Well, I guess he learned his lessons well, so they bring him into the government and give him another
Ponzi scheme on the planet.
Right, and Congressman, on that note, I actually wrote on Fox Business on CodyWillard.com today talking about how Mary Shapiro was the head of FINRA, and there were guys from Stanford actually on the regulatory committee, advisory body for FINRA. She was at the NASDAQ, and of course Madoff was the chairman of the NASDAQ. And how does the Republican, Democrat, Socialist regime reward her? By making her the head of the SEC. How do we get rid of the insiders?
Well, if it were easy, it would have happened. But everything here is not oriented toward doing the right thing or studying economics and understanding free markets. What they do here is everything is directed to political power. And that's why the Republicans got into trouble. They had relatively good beliefs in the year 2000 and 1994 and when Reagan went into office. But when they got in office, all they cared about was maintaining power. And they thought the only way you can maintain power so they can do good things later was to neutralize the Democrats and pass the Democratic programs so that they weren't in opposition anymore. So they sold out, and then they lost all their credibility. But the Democrats will do the same thing. I mean, Obama was the peace candidate. So what's the first thing he does? Puts more troops in Afghanistan and expands the bombing of Pakistan. So he'll lose credibility eventually. But so far, like the judge mentioned, he had a high rating last night, and right now it's not politically productive, to attack Obama. We have to attack the issues and the ideas and to point out that they're doing exactly what the Republicans have done all along, and we have to change our way if we want to save our country.
Tracy Burns.
Congressman, is this part of an overall systemic problem with how we recruit people to Washington, D.C.? I mean, look, everyone's got stuff in the closet. No one has a perfect record. But it seems that when they get down there, we rip them to shreds. We go through everything, their children's pockets. So therefore, it prevents the really good people from wanting to go through with that process. Is that part of this?
Yeah, it is. And, the whole idea of financial reporting, all the things that I have to go through, and I keep thinking, wouldn't it be nice, if they were irrelevant? But all the things they check into and pretend they're interested in is relevant because government is so big and intrusive. I have no objection to taking money from a PAC, but PACs don't give me any money because they know I can't be influenced. But everybody can be influenced by the system, the government's involvement. So I don't think even if you regulated lobbyists and money and all these regulations and knowing everything about everybody's finances, that is going to solve the problem. The only solution is to have a minimal government, make the government very, very small, where if I have an investment in A, B, and C corporation, it would be irrelevant because I wouldn't be able to do it. And that's the only way it happened. Today, it seems like we can't get very many people here who will deal with it strictly on principle. And then again, what if you do it on principle, but it looks like you might have supported a company that you talked to 10 years ago, or they sent you a donation of $500, and you're right. The media may come back and butcher you on it, and there'd be no justification for it either. And I share that sentiment at times.
We have an emailer, Alan from Los Angeles, who asks, why, with oil prices low, is the government not stepping in and filling the strategic oil reserves in case of future shortages?
If that was for me, I wasn't able to pick it up. I couldn't pick up that question.
We had a wild member of our audience here got a little too enthusiastic. With oil prices so low, why isn't the government buying oil and filling the strategic oil reserves?
Well, my question is why don't we just rely on the market, forget about the strategic reserves, and forget about having our military protecting oil overseas, and let the market work? If the price of oil goes up or there's a shortage, the alternative fuels would come in. I always voted against strategic reserves, and we have a bunch of them in my own district down in Texas. But I think that's foolish for the government to be involved in supply and demand of some product like oil. So I just think the government ought to be the other way. They say, well, what should be your energy policy? Well, we really just need the market to determine the energy policy. If we let the government decide, they might decide that you have to have windmills to replace nuclear reactors. And if you look at the number of windmills you need, it makes no sense whatsoever. So I don't want any of the bureaucrats or the politicians I know devising a policy for energy.
Congressman, you earlier used the word fraud, and you said and alluded to the heads of some of the major banks. And I on my show and in my blog, I basically call out Ken Lewis and Vikram Pandey for lying to the shareholders, the public, the regulators, lenders, customers, everybody. Is there any chance that we actually prosecute the heads of these banks and instead of continuing to reward them with welfare?
Well, I have no idea, but if they've committed fraud, they should be. Of course, I've been trying to concentrate on regulation, but I want to regulate the Fed and the Treasury and all the things that Congress does. We need the market to take care of these things. But the main thing is, if they've committed fraud, I think we're derelict. We concentrate on other things and forget about fraud. But the fraud laws of Texas dealt with Enron. We didn't need Sarbanes-Oxley. But that's traditional ever since the Depression. Every time a problem comes up, this psychology here is, well, you need more regulation, you need more SEC regulators, and on and on. And that's what they're going to do now. But the problem now is they're going to be worldwide regulators, world-class regulators. That's what's working behind the scenes right now, is to have a new monetary system and worldwide regulations, and it's going to have to do with collecting tax revenues, the whole works. So, yes, we have a lot of problems in Washington, but if we don't get control of this, we are going to be dealing with a United Nations world government, and it's going to be much more difficult for us to handle. So we're in a life and death struggle for our liberties.
Peter Schiff, do you have any last comments or questions for Congressman Paul?
Congressman, we got 20% of the people who aren't approving of Barack Obama, but unfortunately, he comes in with all this approval, and that's going to give a lot of impetus to a lot of his bills coming through Congress. And unfortunately, I think it's going to take a while for anybody to realize that what he's doing is making the situation worse. So he might continue to enjoy high approval ratings for a while, even as the economy gets worse.
Well, I'll tell you, one reason you shouldn't even worry about that is just think of where George Bush was in September of 2001. Pretty high, probably higher than where Obama is, up in 90%. And it was a steady downhill after that because the people realized what was going on, even though he was still the champion of the war and all these other things. And right after 9/11, he was at his peak, and it's been downhill. It was downhill after that. So this can very well happen. It might be slower. Policies are bad. Conditions are going to get worse. The economy is going to get much worse. And he's expanding the war. His policies have not changed. So it will reflect on his popularity. But we have to deal strictly with the issues and the principles of the market and the principles of liberty. And we won't have to deal with public opinion polls because they're not that reliable.
Burns, last question.
I worry about the upcoming regulation, Congressman. You said yourself we did not need Sarbanes to solve the Enron problem, yet we got Sarbanes out of it. And the legislation then the regulation, becomes behind the eight ball. Because let's face it, the greed in this world will create the next mortgage-backed security, CDO, call it what you will. They're already in the dungeons of those buildings creating this. And then we have the government wasting its time creating rules and tightening legislation, potentially pushing companies overseas because of it all, on something that actually the smart people have moved on to already.
We create all the moral hazard and all the conditions, and we're still working on the assumption that it's a lack of regulation. So that process is doomed to fail, and we're witnessing it. And I just hope that the people and the members of Congress wake up a lot sooner than I expect Bernanke to.
Congressman Ron Paul, thanks very much. We appreciate it. We'll see you next Wednesday on Freedom Watch. You can watch today's show online all week and go to my Facebook page. I have a Facebook page?
Yeah, you're my